Would you characterize him as a dishonest person?
Well, look, I think folks need to make their own decision on this thing. Obviously, I'm running in part because I think folks deserve throughout this state, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, to have someone who tells them the truth and that they can be proud of. I don't think it takes a genius these days, whether you look at the polling data or just travel the state with me each week, to realize that the majority of the citizens in this state don't feel that way about the man who's in the Senate seat right now.
Greg?
What do you think Obama should do about the war in Iraq?
I think that we should get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I have a unique perspective. I have the experience that Senator Dodd doesn't have on the issue. I served as a U.S. peacekeeper in a Muslim nation in Bosnia. I was on the ground for 6 months. And I can tell you from firsthand experience going village to village in a Muslim nation that the worst thing that you can do if you seek to make allies and make the environment more stable is to go in and kill folks. If you go in there and do that, if you're seen as the opposition, if you're seen as the uniform occupational force, as the infidel in a Muslim nation, you're not helping your national security interest. Senator Dodd has gone along with both of these wars for the duration. I vehemently oppose our action in these places. I can say from my firsthand experience, we are on the wrong road in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And if the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan and the Taliban and provided al-Qaeda with a safe, secure base to attack the U.S., would you go back in? Would you want the U.S. to go back in at that point? What would you do?
Well, what you do, first of all, you do a couple of things. You begin with the intelligence report. We stop making up missions and then figuring out a rationalization for them after the fact. If you look at General Jones, the National Security Advisor to the President, who has a tremendous history of serving this nation in uniform, General Jones has said over the last few days that we're now looking at less than 100 al-Qaeda members who are active right now in Afghanistan. At a practical level, is there a Taliban resurgence? Of course there is. It's their traditional land, obviously. But that's not the risk for us from a national security perspective. The risk is al-Qaeda activity. If there are pockets of these people you need to go and eliminate through special operating means, of course you do it. You obviously continue on with the necessary civil affairs, intelligence gathering, force protection. But to send tens of thousands of uniformed troops to be an occupational force in a Muslim nation is a fool's errand. And there's a reason that they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. The person who fails last doesn't get an extra reward. And if you look at the British experience there, the Soviet experience there, and now our experience, I would tell you clearly we're on the wrong track.
We have to break for a few commercials, and I forgot to mention, gone are the days, of course, when print journalists worked for just one newspaper. We can also read Greg Lansky's work in the New Haven Advocate and the Fairfield Weekly. Very good. And we'll be right back with more Face the State in just a moment. Don't forget, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/Dennis House, WFSB. We're back with Merrick Alpert. Let's talk about your new book, Morning Sun. And you had one interaction with Senator Dodd, and that's when you wanted to move your company here to Connecticut.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, he was otherwise occupied, Dennis. It was a night where he had just won re-election. I think it was 6 years ago, in fact. And there were meetings about him running for Senate Majority Leader or perhaps for governor. And so, you know, I suppose that's what career politicians do. They sort of worry about what they're going to run for next. But I was a little surprised by that.
You think he let you down as a senator, as a constituent?
You know, I don't want to go that far. I was surprised at the openness of the political ambition.
And there was a moment when you were a young attorney. You won a big case for a rather prestigious law firm in Hartford. Yeah. And everyone was excited about it. And this really was a life-changing moment for you. Yeah. And you got out of the business altogether. Tell us about that.
Well, what happened was we were representing a certain automobile manufacturer. And it was a big case for me. I think for the firm it's probably a small case. But I went in under Connecticut's lemon law and demonstrated that the individual seeking compensation hadn't satisfied the technical elements of the lemon law, where if you have a lemon for a vehicle, you're allowed to get compensation or a new vehicle. And I felt awful about that. This person didn't have an attorney, and as it turned out, this was a working class woman. She reminded me of my mom. And that really was the day that I decided, you know, this corporate law thing is not for me. And
you've talked about it since you first began running for the Senate. You were raised by a single mom. Your dad left your family at when you were a young age, and I'll let people look at the book if they want to find out how it ends in terms of how you finally tracked down your father. But how did that change? Well, how did it basically, you know, form who you are today, not having a dad?
I think that when you grow up without a father, you have a tendency to need to find your own heroes, find your own leaders. And then you, as you grow up, you go through your teens and your early 20s, I think you have a tendency to achieve. You have a tendency to need to be the man that you didn't have there in your home. And for me, that took the form of serving my nation in uniform in Bosnia. It's taken the form of being the best husband and father I can be, and making sure that I always drive a message of two-parent homes, and making sure I say to folks, hey, look, if you're a father, you have a responsibility to be in your son's life. It's something that's not politically correct, but it's something I believe very strongly in.
Greg?
You're a pretty successful businessman at this point, and we've got a couple of millionaires on the Republican side.
Multi-millionaires.
Multi-millionaires coming into the Senate race.
Yeah.
Senator Dodd is no pauper himself.
Yeah.
How do you feel? I mean, are there too many people with too much money getting into politics these days? And is it becoming the truth that the only people with money can afford to run?
Yeah, it's a great question. The sad reality is, for most people, they buy elections. Most people, whether they take the money from corporate special interest or whether they take it out of their own bank accounts, they buy elections. How do they do it? Well, they buy television time, they buy other advertising, and they saturate their name out there in the marketplace. I think that's sad. I believe in publicly financed campaigns at a federal level, and I also believe in term limits. I think that we need to get new people in with new ideas to move the state and this nation forward. The notion that you can sell yourself like a bar of soap, I find that extraordinarily troublesome. That, to me, is not what democracy should be about.
So you think that we shouldn't have too many more millionaires running?
Well, I think the last entrant, I don't want to name names, but I think the last entrant was a multi-hundred millionaire, whatever the term for that is. And when I hear across the state someone openly saying they're going to spend $30 or $40 million of their money to win a Senate race, that doesn't make me feel good. I mean, that, you know.
Did you feel good about Ned Lamont, another one of your fellow Democratic liberals who challenged Joe Lieberman and spent a whole bunch of his millions on that race?
I think Ned would be the first one to tell you we should have publicly financed campaigns. Ned saw how tough it was even with resource. I think Ned would argue for public financing. He's a very progressive guy and is a good person. Look, no matter who's spending the money on whichever side of the aisle, I don't think anyone's going to say that you get greater amounts of civic involvement and greater elevation of the discourse when somebody papers themselves all over the place and doesn't have to have a substantive conversation. Look, I'm engaged in a grassroots campaign. When I'm out there each evening in front of Democratic town committees and Rotary clubs and civic groups, my discussion is about private sector job creation, clean government, and getting out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't have the luxury of papering up my picture all over the walls on TV and saying, hey, vote for me and I'll tell you what I'm going to do later on.
And how much do you think you're going to need to spend to win that primary?
Well, in this initial phase of ballot qualification, you don't have to raise, obviously, a fortune in the sense that much of this is going on in small meetings with Democrats across the state. In that 90-day window for the primary, look, every dollar is significant, and I recognize my opponent is going to spend tens of millions of dollars of corporate special interest money against me, but so be it. I'm of the belief that this is one of those elections which is going to fundamentally alter the landscape. I'm of the belief that people are sick and tired of the economic situation they're in and the fact they have got a senator who is out of touch with them and isn't straight up with them. And for that reason, I think this race can be won on the Democratic side. If it's not, as I tell audiences every night across this state, if we want to guarantee that we have a Republican senator in Connecticut, then we should nominate Christopher Dodd as our next Democratic nominee.
But how much do you think you'll need to spend to win that primary?
I think if you can raise a couple $100,000, then you'll be able to reach enough people to change it. Look, all I'm doing is striking a responsive chord. I'm not out there creating a belief in anybody's mind. I'm just the guy who's willing to stand up and say enough is enough, we can do better. And that is what people are looking to hear.